All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this webinar on bridging the gap between pre and post sales. My name is Jason Whitehead. I'm the CEO and founder of Tritons. With me today is my co-host, Ed Czech from Mergeable. Just to kick things off a little bit about Tritons, my background. Tritons is a customer success and software adoption training consulting firm. And we work with both the buyers and sellers of software to make sure that both get full value from their services. So we do a lot of work with the buyers of software to help them set up and put together internal user adoption programs to make sure their organization is effectively using the technology that they've purchased. And we spend a lot of time working with SaaS companies and other non-SaaS companies, actually, helping to set up and establish customer success teams, to train their teams, to build their playbooks and get them going. So we do a lot of work really focusing on the people, organizational, and process issues to make sure that once the system is up and running, that the buyers are getting value so that they're able to renew and expand their accounts, and that the customer success teams are providing the services and helping fill in the gaps and the expertise that may be lacking in their internal organization. So with that as a quick backdrop, I want to just turn this over to my co-host, Ed, to introduce himself and his company.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, my name is, as Jason said, my name is Ed Czech. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Mergeable. We're building the first customer lifecycle platform for technology companies. Spent a lot of my career in both pre-sales and post-sales, business development, sales, product management, customer success at leading enterprise technology companies like Cloud Health and Actifio, and managed strategic partners like Amazon Web Services, Microsoft, and Google. And then most recently was working directly with Fortune 500 senior IT executives as the general manager of what we call the Velocity Network, which is a partnership between two tier one venture firms, General Catalyst and CRV, and had an opportunity to spend time, digging into senior IT executives' projects and needs and relating that back to the portfolio companies from General Catalyst and CRV. And Mergeable is kind of a culmination of all of these years of experience building and selling enterprise technology.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you so much for being here today. What I like about this is Ed has so much experience working on the pre-sale side, and a lot of our experience has been on the post-sale side. And we bring some nice two perspectives here that I think we can blend together nicely. So just a little housekeeping information. This webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending out a link to the recording probably in the next day or two, so please keep an eye out for that. Also, as you're going through, please go ahead and type your questions into the Q&A box. There's no need to wait to the end of the webinar. We will answer them towards the end. And a little bit about our format for this. We tend to target 30 to 45 minutes for the webinar. We try to go light on a lot of the presentation and focus more on the questions that people ask. And we've already had several questions during the registration process. This is a fun topic for folks. So we're going to quickly, I think, tee up the topic and then really focus on the questions that are most important to you all on the webinar. So please, we love getting questions on the fly, so please type them in as things come up. So with that as a backdrop, I think most of us understand that there's a gap of some nature. But Ed, why don't you tell us a little bit about why is it so important to bridge the gap between pre and post sales?
Yeah, and if you switch to the next slide, so if you think about the customer's journey, there's been this proliferation of tools both on the pre-sale side for implementation and onboarding, customer success, and product to an extent. And what we've found is it creates a lot of chaos. It's a really chaotic experience both internally for your employees and externally for the customer. And it tends to create a lot of different points of friction for your end users as well. And so, ultimately this stuff has implications on revenue. So it's really important that you try to address these things as early as possible, ideally before you really even build out a customer success organization.
Yep, I agree with that. And so many times the customer success teams that we're working with, they have a lot of struggles getting the right information from sales about who they need to speak to and where they need to go. And during that critical initial onboarding phase, as a result of this, sometimes the customer is just like, what's wrong with you guys? You don't have your act together. Why am I answering these questions 3 or 4 times? And I think ultimately one of the things that often comes up that we remind CS teams is when a new buyer comes in, they're taking a lot of personal risk to bringing you into their organization. They've put time and money and their reputation on the line. They want to be able to demonstrate to their peers and the other folks in their organization that the vendor they've selected and all this effort is going to make their organization successful. So the more chaos that you have, the more it's harder for the buyers to actually feel confident in what's going on and that they're going to be successful. So Ed, why don't you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, so we've seen this. I've seen it firsthand. I've experienced it firsthand, selling technology products and platforms to enterprises. But consistently, and we see this with our customers before they implement something like Mergeable. But there's really a tremendous lack of visibility into what the customer's doing, and I don't just mean like what they're doing on a day-to-day basis inside of the product, but what are they achieving? Are they getting hung up in different places? And that sort of ties into the ability to measure their progress throughout their life cycle. And then we see, and this is even true, it amazes me, in 2018, there's a severe lack of automation across teams. So we actually find that teams spend upwards of 30% of their time just on administrative work. And depending on the organization, I've seen that number as high as 60%, and at the low end, maybe 20% if somebody's got like a slightly optimized technology stack. And ultimately, obviously, this increased complexity and misalignment among teams creates a lot of friction, not just internally between, let's say, pre-sales and post-sales. So think of the example where somebody is, the sales rep closes the deal and then there's a handoff to implementation and onboarding, but also for your customer as well. So anytime there's this sort of barrier between teams internally, chances are you're probably creating a point of friction for your customer as well. So it's something you really need to think about and try not to be, if we think about how we've built our organizations, it's sort of self-serving, but we need to sort of think about what the customer's experience is throughout their life cycle, so that we can be as effective as possible and so that they have, successful outcomes ultimately.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think, a lot of folks, they get so busy doing their own job that they forget that other folks in the organization have different needs for visibility into customer activity, customer data, what's going on, whether you're customer success or training or product or someone else, that really the organizations need to figure out how to collaborate most effectively, because we've seen time and time again, hours and hours wasted in meetings just because sales and the pre-sales and post-sales teams are just not in sync. And it's a lot of wasted time that could be spent both selling as well as servicing customers and doing more revenue generating tasks. So it's really key there. Let's talk a little bit more then about what can you do pre-sales and during onboarding customer success. Ed?
Yeah, so if we break this down into, I like to think about the customer's life cycle as essentially different phases or customer journey, whatever you want to call it. And so if we just start with pre-sales, and so these are some tips and things that we've seen and come across that have proven to be incredibly valuable, not just for us, but for our customers as well. And so one of the things that we've done, and I've done it at my companies for as long as I can remember, is really try to incentivize the pre-sales teams. And so when I say pre-sales, I'm referring to not just sales reps, but sales engineers, solution architects, anybody involved in that sales process. And so what you want to try to do is incentivize them to not just close the deal, but see that something like the onboarding process runs smoothly. Another thing that we've done is we typically have the pre-sale or the sales reps manage the renewals. So they'll work closely with the customer success team, and when it comes time for renewal, they've already been engaged throughout the customer's journey or life cycle. And so they're more equipped to do the negotiation at the end of the day. So it's nice to sort of keep them involved as long as you can and really incentivize them to stay engaged. Another thing that we've done is this idea around what we call a win flash, or essentially why we won, why were we selected as the vendor. And so this is an email that, and there's different formats that you can do it, either through Slack or maybe email, or maybe upload something into Salesforce or whatever your CRM is, but essentially a summarization of why the customer purchased a product. And so this should include anything from, was this a competitive scenario? If so, who were the competitors that we beat? Were there specific features or functionality that drove the decision? Who were the key stakeholders? What are their long-term objectives? So, what's really important for CS is defining or identifying, not what just are your 6 months goals, but what are you looking to achieve over the next 3 to 5 years? And the other thing that this really does is it gets the entire company engaged and interested in these deals. And so just to give you an example, at Cloud Health, we consistently had engineers come up to us and say, on the sales organization, come up to us and say, hey, this is awesome that we just closed this Fortune 500 deal. These were actually three features that you mentioned in that win flash were features that I worked on. Let me know, how they're doing. Let me know if their needs aren't being met, or if there's any areas that I can maybe influence on the engineering side. So it was a great way to just sort of collectively have everybody engaged and involved in the pre-sales process.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later too, is also making sure you're clear on the role for the customer success team in the pre-sales process and where they should be joining and adding value. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So then there's the onboarding phase. Ed, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so ideally what you want to do is start defining an onboarding plan after you've been selected, hopefully before you've been selected as a vendor, but after you've been selected as the vendor, and maybe you start that contract negotiation, start to work with the key stakeholders to define a 30, 60, 90-day plan for implementation and onboarding. And this is something that the sales organization in some capacity should be involved with. So we would define like, hey, what does success look after 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? And then we measured it. And so one of the ways to do this effectively is you want to get the customer as engaged as possible in defining this plan for onboarding. And what this also does is it forces them to have some skin in the game so that you can hold them accountable during that 30, 60, 90-day rollout. And then, like I mentioned, you do want to try to overlap pre and post sales. So keep the sales rep involved as much as necessary. So, whether that's just the sales rep maybe joining some of these onboarding and implementation calls, but the customer ultimately doesn't want to feel like they're just being passed around the company. And one of the ways to do this is to just think of customer success not as necessarily a function inside of the company, but something that's sort of living and breathing and gets applied to every stage of the customer's life cycle.
Yep. I think that's so important. We actually, we're working with one customer success team where we walk them through how to actually build out some of these 30, 69-day plans, which include working with the customer about how the customer was going to drive internal adoption, remove barriers that would prevent it, and achieve business goals. And their end customer said to them, no vendor has ever done this for us. This is a great plan. We actually understand now that there's a lot of things we have to do internally that we never knew would affect our success. And they were very appreciative. And it sounds pretty basic, but I think when doing these plans, make sure that it's not specific just to your product or what you do internally, but also, as Ted's point, built with the customer and helps address the non-technical issues that will drive or prevent success as well. Which I think leads us to the next point, customer success. So Ed?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, you want to incentivize pre-sales teams to stay involved and maybe even have them do renewals. On the other side of that, you want to get CS engaged in the pre-sales process if you can. And obviously this is this obviously has to do maybe with the number of resources that you have at your disposal. I would say if you have the resources, try to get them involved as many deals as you can. Obviously, most companies don't have that number of resources available. So be strategic about it. So, if it's a Fortune 500 deal, or if it's competitive, or you have a competitor in there, it's a nice way to differentiate yourself and start to establish a better rapport with the customer and a longer term relationship with that customer. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to throw in a couple things there as well too. Is we've worked with we were training a team that had both customer success and sales reps in the training course, and one of the things that was interesting is that the customer success team knew that there were certain pieces of information that they needed to have and questions that needed to be asked of the customer even before the sale was complete that were going to be critical to driving their success and making sure they were doing the right things for the customer. But they also knew that part of their job was to build relationships with the customer so that the CS team was viewed as a trusted advisor. It was not viewed as a support resource or an admin resource. And the only way they can build relationships is to actually be there and engage directly with the customer and ask questions, because it's really important that who asks the question matters. And that's how that the customer and their executive team start to have faith and confidence in the CS team. And yet the sales folks were very concerned that having CS people in the room would slow down the sale. And what they wanted to do was say, just give us a list of the questions and we'll get the answers and we'll tell you. And they've misunderstood that it wasn't just about getting the answer, which was important, but also who asked the question mattered, who got the answers, or who gets the answers is very important. So making sure that sales understands that CS needs to build their own relationships, or the post-sales team needs to do that, and that can't be managed remotely, and that the sales team can't do that for them is pretty critical.
Yeah.
And then one last thing we've seen as well is that sometimes sales folks, in their eagerness to close a deal, were really going after deals that there was no way the vendor could make them successful. There was no way that this customer was going to achieve the outcomes that they wanted, and they were a high churn risk even before they signed up the first time. And what was going to happen is if they continued to pursue these deals, the CS team was going to spend a lot of time and money on a customer they could never make successful, and they wouldn't make absolutely no profit on this deal. So more and more having the CS team involved to help the salespeople say, is this a customer that we can actually make successful? Should we be pursuing this work? Or are they so far out of our target profile that it's going to just be a giant waste of time and resources and ultimately slow down the whole company? So that's another area that we've seen CS teams getting involved.
Yeah, and I see Scott has a question. Do you support a model that keeps the sales engineer with the new client as their customer success manager? Thus eliminating the feeling of loss that a new prospect feels when the sales engineer leaves them and moves on to a new sales cycle. So this is, we've, having come from a world where we have really technical kind of sales engineers and solution architects, we tried to keep them involved as much as we could in the implementation and onboarding process. So you do want to kind of come up with a structure, and I don't want to use the word rules, but maybe like guidelines for these sales engineers. So I think during the pre-sale side, the sales rep should have some autonomy. So if they think bringing in a customer success person earlier is strategic to a deal and can help get a deal over the finish line, they should have the ability to make that decision. Obviously they have to back it up with reasons they have to be able to justify it. And I think the same is true with the sales engineer. So, if you're moving if it's a strategic customer and the customer success person starts to get involved and realizes quickly, well, the sales engineer has a really good rapport with the client, the customer success person should have just as much of the ability to justify or request that the sales engineer maybe stay involved in the engagement for as long as they need it. Especially if it's a strategic customer. So you should have some guidelines in your customer. I don't think that it makes sense to have a sales engineer convert into the customer success person for that customer. I do think it makes sense to have the sales engineer work closely with the customer success manager and just sort of have the customer success manager manage the account and maybe guide the CS person or sales engineer and use that sparingly if possible.
Yeah, and I've not seen a situation where the sales engineer converts into the success manager. And two things come to mind. One, a lot of the customer success managers, they also need to make sure that they are getting the client focused on business outcomes, because ultimately that's what's going to make the buyer decide if they're going to renew or not. And if people are too heavily involved in the product and the engineering of the feature and function set, many times they gear a lot of their conversations to the product as opposed to the business outcomes that will determine renewal and expansion. So I think having a customer success person who's a little bit more removed from the deep details of a product, but focused on business outcomes is pretty key. And the other thing that we found is that there's such a norm for turnover in organizations and people switching, especially as the economy is picking up as well too. A core competency of any good CS team is their ability to help transition clients over from different phases, because people will come and go. Your customer success manager will come and go. You're on the client side, your project sponsor and executive and point of contact, they will transition over time. So making sure that you can hand off relationships effectively is pretty key. So with that being said, I do agree with Ed that if it's a critical deal, they've got to be involved. The sales engineer needs to be involved as necessary to get over the product, the finish line, and then to help build the confidence in the other team. but you do need to learn how to transition deals very well.
Yeah, and the objective should be to get the sales engineer off the deal at some point. You don't, because I know at my companies that our sales engineers could manage anywhere upwards of 20 plus deals. So ultimately you want them spending their time, especially if it's a good sales engineer, ultimately you want them spending time on the sales process and working with prospective customers. So yeah, there's got to be some guidance and some rules, but everybody's sort of got to do what they do best.
Exactly. So Ed, I see we've got a few recommendations, and then we've got some other questions that we wanted to get to. So why don't you kick us off and lead us through some of the recommendations on how to bridge the gap?
Yeah, I would say the first thing, and probably the most important thing here is, and this is something that we talk to our customers about, and I've seen more and more, or heard more and more, is customer success. You shouldn't think of customer success necessarily as a function within a company, but customer success should really start on day one when prospects first engage with your company. And when you think about customer success in that way, so less of a function and more of a methodology that gets applied to the entire organization, already right away you start to break down some of these barriers that exist, and it enables you to sort of share a single sort of view of the customer's life cycle or journey. Everybody's kind of on the shared mission now to make that company or that prospective customer successful, and then ensure that they have continued success throughout their engagement with you. And a couple other things that I do want to mention, and so this ties maybe back to the idea. So there's obviously a lot of customer success platforms and products that have come to market, and they've almost benefited in creating these customer success functions and roles inside of a company. However, what we're seeing with our customers is, they prefer not to actually go out and purchase a big piece of customer success software or platform. And a lot of times what we find is that they can leverage their existing CRM. So something like Salesforce has all of the functionality of something like Gainsight. So you should really try to leverage the hell out of it if you can. Another area as it relates to software is you do want to try and automate as much as you possibly can. So what we've found is companies are actually, their employees are spending upwards of 30-40% of their time just on administrative work. So if you want to try to automate as much of the administrative side of the job as you can, so that a CS person or a salesperson or a sales engineer really focus on the relationship and the business outcomes that you want to see. So I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, we've seen some similar things where a lot of our customer success clients, all of them have at some point in their journey looked at the CS vendors, the Gainsights and Strike Decks and Turn Zeros and all those good folks. And many of them say, yeah, there's a lot of important functionality there, but we're not ready for it yet, or we don't need it yet. So what we've seen pretty consistently is people check them out, understand what they do, and then start small and internal using CRMs or even Excel and to get started. And then as they grow and scale, then they look to add automation later. But they've also found that they're not tight yet on their own internal organization and capabilities and methodologies yet of customer success. So they want to get those done first. I've even heard stories of people having to switch out CS tools already or re-implement them because they realized that their playbooks and their methodologies and their strategies weren't right yet. So they spent a lot of time and effort getting the tool set up, and they had to go and do it all again. The other thing I would throw out, I agree with you about using automation where you can, but that's also really important where bridging the gap between pre and post sales. For automation to be effective, everyone's got to be following the same processes and being consistent how they do things. So otherwise you can get situations where if some people are expecting automations to send out notifications or to do other certain tasks and someone doesn't do the step that's going to trigger those, then something gets missed. Or the other way, if they put something in wrong and they trigger an automation that should not have gone internal or to a customer, they've wasted more time. So really being tight on how you're adopting internally your own tools that can have a direct impact as well.
Yeah, the other thing I want to add is when you purchase software, you tend to create an additional silo of data in some way or another, which which ultimately will create another point of friction. So, again, going back to try to avoid purchasing too much software or products if you can, because ultimately you're just adding layers of complexity that aren't going to serve your employees and your end users.
Yep. Well, let's unless you have other points here, let's jump to some of the questions we had in advance.
Yeah, just one quick point. So, having this single consolidated view of a customer's life cycle is really important. So something else that we would do is create this internal knowledge deck or document about a customer. And that started in the pre-sales process. So the sales rep wasn't able to close out the account in Salesforce until they uploaded this internal knowledge deck doc. And you could host this in Google Docs if you want, or Confluence or something like that. And essentially it turns into this living, breathing doc or document about the customer and the status of the customer. And it's something that gets iterated on by all of the teams in the company. So this is incredibly important, not just for like a sales team or a customer success team, but also product teams. If a product team needs to check in and see what this Fortune 500 customer is doing, what's the status of the account, where are they getting hung up, that sort of thing. This is a good shared place that anybody in the company really should have access to. Not necessarily to edit and iterate on, but they should be able to view it. The other reason this is important, because everybody knows with software companies, there's just a lot of turnover. Employees leave, customers transition. So this serves as a single source of truth for the customer. So if you hire a new customer success rep, people are constantly reshuffling accounts. So it's really important that you have this shared record of where the customer is, so that a new CS rep can come in and say, okay, these are the features that they care about. These are the key stakeholders. This is what they're looking to achieve over the next year. This is where I should be focusing my time and attention.
Yeah, and when we've helped organizations build similar things, also it's making sure they capture what are the customer's internal business issues or organizational issues that will prevent them being successful, that are drivers for success. What are they doing to ensure effective adoption of current users, and even how are they going to onboard future users to make sure they're successful? So making sure that it's not just focused on features of your product, but also from the customer's perspective, what are the things that the customer needs to be addressing internally? Because many times the customer success managers need to have discussions with the customer about all their internal issues that need to be resolved and how to help with that.
Yep.
Okay, so let's turn to some of the questions. And if you have other questions as you've been listening or as we continue, please type them in. So we have the first question is, do you have any advice for implementing customer success with older clients? And do you think it requires a different approach, or should we treat all of our clients, old and new, the same now the program is implemented? I'll leave this one off, and Ed, you can jump in. What we found is that many of the customer success teams really evolve their capabilities and their impact and grow over the a 2 or 3 year period. And the customer success team and their services of what they're trying to do now would be very different than 3 years ago. So they do have to go through and sort of reintroduce it to the existing customers, and say, look, this is what we do now. Let's talk about how it's changed, how we work together, what are some new expectations for what you do and what we do, and how we can make each other effective here. And many of the CSMs that we've worked with have really enjoyed that process, because it gives them a nice way to go and reach back out to customers and really talk about the new things they'll be doing to help drive business value, and to help reposition their role from whatever it may have been in the past to one that's seen as a business partner, a proactive resource, a trusted advisor that's really going to help the customer do things that they can on their own. And we've had great response when we hear about those. But what we have also found is that as you standardize on your customer success processes and offerings, and you do want to standardize on them, how you introduce that to existing customers will be a little bit different than how you roll it out to new customers, and especially if you have the opportunity to get involved pre-sale. So during the pre-sales opportunity, there's a lot of areas where you can explain to the customer, here are the services we provide, here's how we will engage with you at different points in your life cycle, and here's some things that we typically do in the first 90 days, here's what we'll typically do at year 2, year 3, and beyond that, and explain how the relationship will evolve over time. That's very different than doing that up front with a prospective new customer than it would be someone who you've been working with for 3 or 5 years, who either you're no longer going to do stuff that you've never done before or that you used to do, or you're introducing new things that you've never done before and they have no understanding or context for why you would be doing this. So I definitely think that having standard services is key. How you introduce them to different clients, new and old, will be different. Ed, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sorry. No, not really. I think just as long as you're clear about what your objectives are and reasons for maybe creating different tiers and that sort of thing, both clear with your employees and the customer. That's probably the only thing I'd add.
Yep. Okay. So then, Ed, the next question for you is, how engaged should CSMs be pre-sales, and who should own upsells and renewals? How should CSMs identify leads and be rewarded for them? And should sales success do joint QBRs? And who should own the relationship with the customer? And what exactly does that mean? And how do you make roles and responsibilities between sales and success clear? So
yeah,
quite a bit packed in there.
Yeah, let's unpack this a little bit. So how engaged should CSMs be pre-sales? So we answered this earlier, but I think if you want them to be as engaged as you can possibly make them. So it depends obviously a lot on the resources that you have. You'll probably have to be somewhat strategic about when you get them engaged, but they should be engaged at some point or another. So I think it's somewhat dependent on your organization. What stage are you guys at? Then depending on that, like determine, when and how should we be utilizing the CS person in the pre-sales process, and sort of set guidelines too, like, hey, for any Fortune 500 account that projected revenue exceeds X dollars, we absolutely need a CS person involved at this specific phase of the evaluation or proof of concept. Who should own the upsell? So I've just found that salespeople are actually more equipped to handle upsells and renewals. They're used to negotiating. They negotiate. That's their job. It also gives an opportunity, or it allows for the CS person to maintain more of that trusted advisor type of role with the customer. And this goes back to keeping pre-sales engaged and going back to incentives too. So, if you're incentivizing the pre-sales or the sales rep to stay engaged with the account and manage the upsell and the renewal, and they're going to get paid out for something like that, you can bet that they're going to try to stay engaged and help the customer success person as much as they possibly can. I don't know if you want to add anything quickly to that, Jason.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The CSMs we work with, they are not interested in doing renewals or negotiations. Well, they're not interested in doing negotiations, and frankly, there's a lot of administrative work with that and contractual piece, and they want to be able to maintain that relationship as that trusted advisor. And with that being said, one of the things that we found very effective is when the CSM first gets introduced to the client, as part of clarifying the role, they even let the client know, I'm not incentivized or renew on renewals and upsells. That's not my job. But part of my job is to make sure that you understand all the potential additional value you can get from our services. So I will occasionally be identifying areas where we think that we could help solve some problems that we're seeing, and that will be up to you to figure out how to move forward with that. But I want to advise you of some options that you may not be aware of that could really be a benefit to you. So I think there's a lot a CSM can do to tee it up for a salesperson to make it, an easier sell as they go, but the CSM should not be the one doing it themselves.
Yeah, we got a couple of questions, one from Sarah and one from an anonymous, but centered around incentivizing pre-sales teams. So when I say pre-sales, just to clarify, pre-sales in my sort of worldview includes not just a sales engineer or solution architect, but also the salesperson. So when I say you're incentivizing a pre-sales person, I mean the actual sales rep. So the sales rep should be somebody handling the renewal. Typically, you're just speaking specifically to the sales organization. Typically, we have some kind of, so the sales rep obviously has a number that they need to hit. A smaller percentage of that number is the sales engineer's objective as well. And then in addition to that, we typically have some kind of bonus structure for a sales engineer. Same sort of thing. And Jason, I'd be interested to hear your perspective on this. But having the sales rep manage the renewal and upsell opportunity, how do you guys, how do your clients structure maybe commission from those deals. What we've done historically is, the rep will the percentage breakdown between the rep and the CS person is probably going to be somewhat similar to the rep and the sales engineer on the pre-sales side. So really comes down to just like percentages and building these things into the sales reps on target goals and that sort of thing. But I don't know if you have anything you want to add there.
The things that I've seen are a lot of CSMs not being compensated, not having a target and incentive structure or commission structure around it. That was more for the sales folks. What I have seen done effectively are some sort of CS team group bonuses based on whatever level of renewals they get across the team, but not for any one specific deal. But I have also seen where the VP or executive who's leading the CS team, they need to have some sort of incentives around renewals and upsells so that they're making sure that their CS team is doing the right thing for the clients as well too. So basically, I haven't seen direct incentives for a particular deal for the CS team, but I have seen group deals and CS executives having some sort of piece in there.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
So rewarded for them, should sales success do joint QBRs? I don't know if you necessarily need to do joint QBRs, but you should. I've never done that in the past. What we do is we'll have let's say we have our sales kickoff or something. We'll typically do a large session with the customer success team, just to talk about things that maybe are working, aren't working, but I don't really look at that as like a joint QBR and more just like a strategy type session. Yeah,
I've seen a lot of a lot of groups don't even do QBRs that much anymore, but we'll do the executive business review and probably not quarterly. I've seen a lot of times where success is leading those, but I think if the sales team is going to be involved in renewals and upsells as it gets closer to that time period, they may want to be involved in there, so it doesn't seem like they're just zipping in and zipping out. But I've also seen that sales folks have their own pipeline that they've got to work, and depending on their deal, if it's a separate team that does the renewals, which I've seen several times as well too, you can do that. So trying to balance the workload, but keeping in mind that part of the goal for the customer success team is to keep the customer focused on their business outcomes and their results so that they renew and expand. I mean, that is the job of the CS team. So I think they should be able to lead those calls and get them done. Great. So then who should own the relationship with the customer, and what exactly does that mean? And how do you make roles and responsibilities between sales and success clear?
I would say just at a high level. So pre-sales, sales rep is going to predominantly own the relationship, post-sale customer success. And then the roles and responsibility, I think you start to make that distinction more during that implementation and onboarding phase. So, the CS person gets involved in the pre-sales process, and then during that implementation and onboarding process, or as part of that process, you should make it clear to the customer, hey, so-and-so is going to be your main point of contact now. I'm going to stay engaged. Should you need anything, but the CS rep is really going to be owning the relationship here going forward.
Yeah, and I think sort of related to that is during the initial onboarding phase, the CS rep needs to own the relationship and be heavily involved, but there may be a ton of work for a while with the implementation team or a training group before they're actually live, during that onboarding window. But the CS person should really be building the relationship with the customer and figuring out what are all the other things that need to be done after the onboarding to make sure they get that outcome that they need so they renew and expand. Okay, so what are the top 2 reasons it's so difficult to integrate customer information across all functions?
Yep. So we alluded to some of this earlier, but I think probably the most important thing here is you're thinking of customer success not necessarily as a function or role within a company, but as something that gets applied to all of these companies. So or across all of these roles. And so if you can figure out a way to incentivize all of these teams to ensure that your customers are successful, and it's kind of like this joint shared sort of mission going forward, you break down a lot of these barriers and you remove a lot of these points of friction naturally. And then the other thing I'd say is probably, I think this probably relates to just software. So, we see with companies that have a CRM and have like very distinct sales roles and functions and very distinct customer success roles and functions. And then on top of that, they have a CRM and they're using something like Gainsight. You've already created a lot of silos of data inside of the company, and you're not really incentivizing these teams to share information fluidly. So I think if early on, you start to think of customer success as this joint effort between pre and post sales. I almost hate that the word or term customer success turned into this function, because I think just naturally people started to build up this idea or notion in their head that, okay, CS is going to be this standalone function inside of a company. But the reality is, like, customer success really needs to start on day one when a prospect first engages with your company.
Yep, agreed. Okay, so we have a question here that says, I'm specifically interested in how you accomplish successful onboarding and adoption processes at scale, i.e. where there's not one-to-one coverage for accounts. And what onboarding and adoption strategies and tactics have you used that work well in hub, cohort, and tech touch customer success models? So, I think there's a lot to this, and that there are definitely things that you can do when you're not in one-to-one coverage, such as if you have small customers or medium-sized one. One of the things that we start with is, having worked with so many buyers of systems, many buyer organizations do not realize what it takes for them to be successful with technology. Many of them are good at getting systems up and running. They're good at getting them live and turned on, but they're really not good at driving adoption and getting the business outcomes they want within their own organization. And when we work with these organizations, we find that they really don't understand the processes by which you need to do that and what are the activities they need to do internally. So they typically do a little training and communication, and that's about it. So one of the first things that has been such a boost when we work with the customers is going through and actually educating the customer about better ways to do drive adoption and success within their own company, and figuring out how you can build the skill set and capacity of your customers so that they're an amplifier and they can be successful on their own. So what that typically means is there may be some sort of educational process or training that needs to happen, or workshops with customers. And this can be online, this can be automated, this can be en masse, teaching them what are some of the organizational issues that they need to address internally in their own community, in their own place, so that they can get the outcome that they want. And basically, you're creating an amplifier for them. And we've actually helped several companies set up user adoption program teams and program management offices to drive adoption and success internally. And that takes so much weight off of the vendor. So I would definitely look at what are ways you can do that, and how to automate some of those processes. And then once you've gotten the customer a little bit more educated about some of the activities that they need to do and the reasons behind them and how to do them, building out some of the tools and templates and checklists and materials that they can use that may be specific to your product, geared towards how they can drive adoption and onboarding within their own organization. So getting them educated, giving them tools and templates. And then I think there are a lot of things that we found very effective when doing sort of mass engagement techniques, whether it's hub and cohort stuff, such as doing ongoing series of recorded videos or webinars or interactive pieces where you might have people from all different customer groups in there, getting access and learning this information, webinars on demand, but giving them a path forward so that they can really be self-service and be self-sufficient. But then also the other big thing is making sure that you really do break it down into small chunks and that you're moving them forward progressively. So we've done things such as helping customers map out, okay, week one, we need all of our end users to go and do these 3 activities, or use this module and create 3 records of this type. Week 2, we want to build on that and now use this functionality and add another 5 records and update several others. Week 3, do this. Week 4, do that. Really getting to the point that they have a checklist of, am I doing enough work in the system over each of these weeks so that I'm learning it and I'm getting comfortable with it and I'm building on success. So start with the simple, fast, low-hanging fruit, and then building up to more complex, more value-added modules, but really getting them comfortable and confident and taking actions they can say, yep, I did my assignment for this week. It's really interesting. We've had a lot of end users actually say to us, yeah, I was trained on the system, but no one ever asked me to use it. So that's pretty key. And the other thing to think about is what we've consistently found is that the single biggest driver of user adoption and success within a buyer's organization is the immediate supervisor and manager of the end user. They're the ones who lay out the expectations for how a system should be used and when and how frequently. They're the ones who hold end users accountable if they do their work well or if they've skipped over some things. And so many times the immediate supervisors and managers are never asked to do this, and they don't necessarily know how to drive success within their own organization. So targeting some efforts at the supervisors and managers of end users, and that may be cascaded throughout the organization, is really key. So that's one I highly recommend. Ed, do you have any thoughts on that, or should we go to the last question?
No, I think that was good. It's kind of a decent segue actually into a question Scott has. So what is a good process for the customer success team to keep the sales team updated on current and future expected activities and needs for the clients? And obviously when teams operate in silos, the clients tend to pay the price. So a couple of things you can do here, Scott. So one of the things that we've done previously is, when you incentivize the sales team by having them manage the renewal and upsell process, hopefully naturally any good sales rep is going to be keen to stay in touch with that customer, or at least stay abreast of anything that's going on with that customer. And that's one way to keep the sales team engaged with customer success and updated. Another thing that we would do is the CS person might send out a monthly or bi-monthly or quarterly email to the sales organization or the specific reps and just say, hey, and list the accounts and say, hey, this account's in good shape. These are some needs, wants, desires of this customer, that sort of thing. Or it might even be a request. So sometimes what would happen is, if the sales rep and the sales engineer have really built a good rapport with the customer, the CS person might go to the sales rep and say, hey, I'm really having a hard time getting in touch with this champion or this executive. Do you think you could reach out to them for me? The other thing that we would do occasionally is actually have like a monthly, bi-monthly or quarterly sort of sit down between the two teams and just really literally put up the list of accounts that the sales team maybe had closed, and just go one by one and just say, and you do this with the sales manager and the CS manager, but you just go one by one, like, okay, how's this customer doing? What are their needs? Do they have anything? Is there any areas that we can help with on the sales team? That sort of thing. But it's a really kind of low touch or easy way to effectively keep the sales team updated on current and future activities and needs for the client.
Yep. I think that's really key. What you just said too is we've seen a lot of stuff where there's obviously the formal channels of what you document and put in the CRM or put in whatever system of record. But then so much of it happens just based on the relationships between the customer success and the sales team, and doing whatever you can to help the sales folks make good relationships with the customer success teams and keep those alive and devote time and effort towards that. A good sales CS team is really worth its weight in gold, I think.
Yep.
So I think that is the end of the questions that we have. Just a couple of quick closing thoughts and pieces of information. Ed, do you want to just let people know a little bit more about your organization if they have any questions?
Yeah, super quick. So, like I said, we're building a customer lifecycle management solution. And really what we enable companies to do is accelerate the sales process, improve customer experience, and reduce churn through what we like to call customized account management. So it can be on the pre or post sales side. And we do it at scale. So, happy to connect with folks. My email is just edward@mergeable.co. You can find me on Twitter at Edward Czech, CZECH. Like I said, happy to chat. But one of the main things that we're trying to do is provide a single sort of consolidated view of the life cycle, and then through different automation and administration through our platform, make it eliminate a lot of that administrative work that comes with some of these roles and functions inside of a company.
Great, awesome, thank you so much. And just a couple of quick things about Tritons. As you know, we do customer success training and consulting, as well as software adoption training and consulting for end customers. So we're always happy to help train up and work closely with the customer success teams, or partner with you to help your customers be more self-sufficient. Want to let you guys know we have recently just launched our updated customer success online training course, and we will be sending out a link to that where there's a free demo that you can take, and everyone who's been on this webinar we'll be getting as well a discount code, Success50 for 50% off. It's good for a limited time. So the online training that we offer is great for individuals or teams, and it can also be included in a blended learning program that includes live instructor-led sessions as well as the online training, and those instructor-led sessions can be delivered virtually or in person. So really excited about it. We've delivered it to some customers already, had great reviews for it, and I think you'll really find it helpful. So please check that out. And then obviously we have a variety of other customer success trainings and workshops as well as software adoption ones. And we will have an updated online software adoption training course coming out very soon, which would be perfect for any of your end customers that are struggling with adoption on their own. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. We really appreciate you being here. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we will be getting in touch soon with the replay and additional information. Thank you.